You're not awakening. You're in a spiritual emergency. Jung knew exactly why most people don't make it. It's not weakness. It's because they're using the wrong map. The anxiety, the intense isolation, the feeling like you're losing your mind while everyone else seems perfectly fine, that is not the awakening going wrong. That is the awakening. Jung called it the night sea journey, a descent so dark, so devastating to everything you thought you were, that most people do one of three things. They either run back to sleep, desperately clinging to unconsciousness. They experience a complete functional collapse, or they fake it, creating a spiritual persona even more false than the one they initially tried to escape. Today, I'll show you precisely what Jung discovered about why spiritual awakening is the most dangerous journey a human can take. Watch till the end to learn the 3 specific psychological traps that destroy most awakening people, and Jung's exact, brutal techniques for navigating each one without losing yourself or your sanity. He didn't just study this, he lived it. At 38, successful, respected, at the very peak of his career, Jung deliberately walked into a period of what he later described as madness. For 6 shattering years, he recorded visions so intense, heard voices so real, and experienced phenomena so destabilizing that he wrote, "I was menaced by a psychosis." He saw things that would have led to immediate institutionalization for anyone else. Floods of blood over Europe, the dead walking and talking, intense, direct conversations with figures from the deepest parts of the psyche that most people never, ever touch. His family thought he'd lost his mind. His colleagues largely abandoned him. He nearly lost everything he had built. But what he found in that uncompromising darkness became the only reliable map that could save your life. Not your spiritual life, but your actual, tangible psychological survival. Because here is what Jung discovered that changes everything you think you know. Spiritual awakening is not what the gurus sell you. It is not ascending to light. It is not transcending your humanity. It is not becoming peacefully enlightened or especially unique. It is the systematic destruction of every single lie you have ever used to stay sane. Jung saw it clearly. Humans need illusions to function. We need our personas, our comfortable projections, our cozy unconsciousness. They are not character flaws. They are psychological survival mechanisms. And spiritual awakening? It strips them all away. Not gently, not with soft love and light, but with a kind of brutal, necessary force that makes people literally lose contact with ordinary reality. Your psyche doesn't want you to wake up. It wants you to survive, and it will fight your awakening with psychic weapons you don't even know you're carrying. Jung identified 3 specific, profound ways the psyche destroys people during this perilous journey. 3 psychological landmines that are guaranteed to detonate the moment you get too close to the essential, uncompromising truth. Unless you know exactly what they are and precisely how they work, you will not survive what is coming. The first trap has already begun for most of you. You just don't recognize it yet because it is perfectly disguised as spiritual progress. It wears the mask of your highest aspirations while secretly feeding on your psychological foundations. Jung watched this pattern systematically destroy his most promising patients. The ones who seemed to be advancing the fastest were often the ones destined to fall the hardest. You think you're becoming more spiritual? You are actually becoming more dangerous. Jung discovered a psychological law that shatters every positive thinking spiritual teaching. The more light you claim, the darker your shadow grows. Not metaphorically, literally, psychologically, measurably. Every meditation session, every spiritual practice, every dedicated attempt to raise your vibration, if you are not simultaneously and consciously descending into your shadow, you are not awakening. You are inflating. And inflation always leads to explosion. Here's what is really happening in your psyche right now. All your life, you have pushed unacceptable parts of yourself into the shadow. Your rage, unacceptable. Your selfishness, shameful. Your sexual darkness? Terrifying. Your sheer power? Too dangerous. Even your authentic joy? Too vulnerable. You buried them so deep you genuinely forgot they existed, and you built a convincing persona that you sincerely believed was you. But Jung discovered something terrifying about this buried self. The shadow doesn't just contain what you've rejected. It contains the exact opposite of everything you've claimed to be. If you have meticulously built an identity on being profoundly kind, your shadow holds pure, cold cruelty. If you pride yourself on your intelligence, your shadow holds your most embarrassing stupidity. If you are the responsible, stable one, your shadow is sheer, destructive chaos. Then the awakening starts, and the shadow does not dissolve into light. It erupts. Jung watched a patient, a seemingly perfect spiritual teacher, never angry, always loving, meditated for hours, begin to have terrifying dreams. Dreams of unimaginable violence, sexual deviance, and murderous, uncontrolled rage. She was convinced she was becoming fundamentally evil. Jung told her the truth that shattered her old identity. You're not becoming evil. You are becoming whole. And wholeness includes everything you have consciously rejected. She couldn't handle the truth. She doubled down on meditation, desperately tried to pray away the shadow. 2 years later, complete, devastating functional collapse. Why? Because, and this will fundamentally change how you see everything, the shadow is not your enemy. Jung called it the seat of creativity. Every ounce of power you have disowned lives there. Every drop of authenticity you have rejected. Every spark of life force you have deemed socially unacceptable. Jung discovered this through his own harrowing shadow work. He found a figure he called Philemon, an ancient wise man living in his unconscious. But to reach Philemon, he first had to face what he called his murder fantasy. Violent, unbidden images of killing, destruction, and chaos. He didn't run. He painted them. He wrote them. He consciously dialogued with them. And through that deliberate descent, he found not evil, but massive, untapped creative and psychological force. The people who survive awakening do not fight the shadow. They feed it. They ask, what essential truth are you carrying that I have been too weak to hold? But here's the sick reality. Spiritual communities hate the shadow. They will teach you to love and light your way past it, to transcend it, to vibrate above it. That is not transcendence. That is spiritual bypassing, and it creates what Jung called the spiritual criminal. Someone so dangerously disconnected from their own shadow that it acts out unconsciously and often ruthlessly. Think about every spiritual teacher caught in a shocking scandal. They didn't just fall from grace. They never integrated their shadow. It was always there, growing stronger in the dark, waiting to destroy everything they built on the lie of their light. Jung documented case after case. A monk who meditated 16 hours a day developed violent fantasies about the other monks. A renowned female healer who preached unconditional love began having dreams of torturing her clients. A spiritual author writing about peace started experiencing rage so intense he would physically black out. None of them were becoming evil. They were simply violently meeting the parts of themselves they had used spirituality to desperately avoid. Your shadow is erupting right now. That visceral anger you feel, that's decades of suppressed righteous rage trying to return home. That raw, dark sexual energy, that's your massive life force returning. That sudden destructive urge, that's your power trying to come home. Most people cannot tolerate this truth. They either repress harder, using spirituality as a weapon against themselves, or they act out, destroying their lives in unconscious shadow possession. Jung's technique was revolutionary: active imagination. Don't just observe the shadow. Engage it, talk to it, ask it what it wants. Give it a voice, a face, a story. Not to become it, but to fundamentally understand it, to integrate its massive energy consciously rather than being possessed by it unconsciously. The ones who survive, they learn to dance with the devil they've been running from. They realize the shadow isn't trying to destroy them, it's trying to complete them. They understand what Jung meant when he said, "I'd rather be whole than good." But even if you integrate your shadow, there is something worse waiting. Everyone talks about ego death like it's the ultimate goal. Jung knew better. He watched what happened when people actually tried to kill their ego. They didn't become enlightened. They experienced complete dereality sensations, losing all functional contact with ordinary reality. Here is what nobody truly understands. The ego is not your enemy, it is your container. Without a functional ego, you don't transcend reality. You lose contact with it. You don't become spiritual. You become unable to function in the world. But here is where it gets twisted. During awakening, the ego doesn't just quietly die. It fights back, and it fights dirty. Jung called it the reality of the psyche. Your ego has been running your life, thinking it's the master in control. Then awakening shows it the truth. It's not the master, it's barely middle management. There are forces in your unconscious, the archetypes, the self, that are infinitely more powerful. The ego's response? Absolute total panic. But it's smart. It doesn't fight directly. It infiltrates. It takes your genuine spiritual experiences and claims them for itself. I had the vision. I received the message. I am special. I am chosen. I am awakened. Something numinous moved through you. You are not it. Jung watched this insidious pattern destroy people. They'd have genuine spiritual experiences, real contact with the numinous. Then their ego would greedily grab it. I touch God, therefore I am godly. This is spiritual inflation, and it is infinitely more dangerous than staying asleep. He documented a patient, a brilliant businessman in his early 40s, who started having profound synchronicities. Everything aligned perfectly. Every thought seemed to manifest. Every desire instantly materialized. He became convinced he'd cracked the code of reality, that he was chosen to teach humanity a new way of being. His ego had violently hijacked a genuine spiritual opening and turned it into a God complex. Within 6 months, he'd left his family, quit his job, and started a full-blown spiritual movement. Within a year, he was living on the streets, convinced reality was a simulation only he could see through. Jung worked with him for 3 years just to help him differentiate between the genuine spiritual content he'd received and his ego's catastrophic inflation around it. Because now you're not just unconscious. You're unconscious while profoundly believing you're awake. You're not just ego-identified. Your ego is identified with ultimate spiritual authority. You're not just asleep. You're teaching others to sleep while confidently calling it awakening. Jung's exact words: the ego becomes inflated when it appropriates contents of the collective unconscious. Every time you think, I'm awakened, and they're not, that's ego inflation. Every time you feel subtly, spiritually superior, that's ego inflation. Every time you believe you have the truth, that's ego inflation. The ego doesn't die during awakening, it evolves. It becomes a spiritual ego, more sophisticated, more deceptive, and far more dangerous than the ordinary one. Jung saw patients who seemed to be progressing beautifully, then overnight, messianic complexes, convinced they were prophets, started gathering followers. 2-3 years later, complete, utter collapse, lives destroyed. The telltale signs Jung identified: they stop questioning themselves. They become absolutely certain about everything. They cannot tolerate criticism. They see signs and messages everywhere confirming their specialness. They believe their thoughts instantly create reality. They think they've transcended basic human limitations. They feel violently called to save or awaken others. What happened? They confused the messenger with the message. They thought that because divine content moved through them, they were the divine. The ones who survive, they learn what Jung called relativizing the ego. The ego remains, but it knows its proper place. Servant, not master. Vessel, not source. Radio, not the signal. Jung's technique: constantly check your inflation. When you feel overwhelmingly special, ask, what archetypal energy am I identifying with? When you feel chosen, ask, chosen by what specific part of my psyche? When you feel completely awakened, ask, what part is still profoundly asleep? The ego needs constant, conscious monitoring during awakening, not destruction, conscious relationship. But this creates a new final problem. Once your ego realizes it's not in control, once it accepts it's necessary to motion, you enter what Jung called the void. No old identity, no new stable identity, no solid ground, just free fall through psychological space. Most people grab the first belief system they find. Anything to stop the falling. That is how cults are born. That is how fundamentalism takes root. That is how spiritual awakening becomes a deeply rigid, terrible spiritual imprisonment. They trade one unstable ego structure for another, usually one far more rigid than what they left behind. But even if you avoid that trap, there is one more waiting that breaks almost everyone. You survived the shadow eruption. You didn't let ego inflation destroy you. You think you finally made it. Then you have to return to regular life. And this is what breaks most awakening souls. Jung called it the problem of the returned hero. In every myth, the hero descends, finds the treasure, and returns to share it. But Jung noticed something the myths don't emphasize. The tribe usually tries to kill the hero, not physically, psychologically, because your awakening is a massive, relentless mirror reflecting everyone else's deep sleep. Your radical authenticity instantly reveals their comforting mass. Your newly found depth exposes their crushing surface existence. Your reality violently threatens their fragile illusions. They do not want you awake. They want you back asleep, where you are safe, predictable, and easily manageable. Jung watched his patients transform, only to return to families who systematically destroyed every single gain. Not maliciously, unconsciously, through intense guilt. You've changed. I don't recognize you. Through manipulation, I like the old you better. Through withdrawal, you think you're better than us now. He documented a woman, a successful attorney and mother of two, who'd gone through profound individuation. She'd integrated her shadow, found her authentic self, developed real consciousness. When she returned to her family, they declared war, not openly but subtly and relentlessly. Her husband started having crushing anxiety about her changes. Her children became clingy and constantly demanding. Her parents continually questioned her mental health. Every single dinner became a battlefield of unconscious projections. Every conversation, an attempt to pull her back down into the collective unconsciousness. Her husband would say, "Remember when you used to be fun?" Her mother would ask, "Are you sure you're okay? You seem different." Her friends would joke, "Look who thinks she's enlightened now." Every relationship becomes a desperate battlefield. Stay awake and lose connection. Go back to sleep and lose yourself. Most people cannot hold this excruciating tension. They either abandon everyone, becoming spiritual refugees, or they abandon their entire awakening, tragically choosing belonging over truth. But here is what is really happening. Your awakening didn't just change you, it changed your frequency. You are literally vibrating at a different psychological rate than the sleeping world. And that frequency dissonance causes actual psychological pain. Not metaphorical pain, but real, somatic, psychological agony. Jung called this the participation mystique, the unconscious psychological fusion that deeply binds families and groups together. When you individuate, you fundamentally break this fusion, and the group experiences your individuation as abandonment, betrayal, even a kind of psychological death. They're not wrong. The you who enthusiastically participated in their unconscious fusion is dead, and they are mourning that death while simultaneously attacking what has been born. Being around unconscious people after awakening feels like nails on a chalkboard inside your skull. Every false conversation, every surface interaction, every unconscious projection, it physically hurts. Jung experienced this personally. After his awakening, normal social interaction became outright torture. Not because he judged others, but because he could see what they couldn't. Every conversation required him to pretend blindness. Every relationship demanded he betray his new sight. Jung wrote about attending dinner parties where he could see everyone's shadows projected onto each other. The host's repressed rage at his wife, the wife's unconscious seduction of the guest's projection of his mother onto the hostess. All invisible to them, but blindingly obvious to him. He'd sit there watching unconscious dynamics play out like a horrific psychological puppet show, unable to speak what he saw without destroying the entire social fabric. So the awakened withdraw, not from spiritual superiority, but from absolute necessity. They cannot unsee what they've seen. They cannot unknow what they know. They cannot pretend unconsciousness without physically destroying themselves. This is the ultimate test. Can you stay awake in a sleeping world? Can you maintain your truth surrounded by pervasive lies? Can you hold your new frequency in a field of intense psychic static? Jung's solution was radical. Selective participation. He learned to dose his exposure to unconscious environments, short bursts with recovery time, strategic withdrawal when needed, creating what he called a temenos, sacred, contained spaces where consciousness could exist without compromise. His famous tower at Balajan wasn't an escape. It was a psychological necessity for his survival. Most cannot manage this precise, difficult balance. They either disappear completely, becoming hermits, addicts, or statistics, or they create a brittle spiritual persona, pretending awakening while secretly dying inside. The ones who survive, they learn what Jung called holding the tension of opposites, fully awake and fully engaged, completely conscious and compassionately present, seeing everything and judging nothing. They develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to bridge these worlds without being torn apart by their differences. They become translators between dimensions of consciousness. Not explaining their awakening, that's impossible, but embodying it in ways that slowly, gently create space for others to begin their own journey. Here is Jung's most devastating final truth. Awakening isn't an event, it's a lifestyle of dying. Every day, something else you thought was true dies. Every week, another identity collapses. Every month, a deeper shadow emerges. Every year, a new ego structure needs dismantling. Jung was still dying to himself in his 80s, still discovering new shadows, still deflating inflations, still integrating new depths. He had a dream near his death where he was a student again, ignorant, seeking, beginning. After decades as Carl Jung, the master psychologist, his unconscious told him, "You know nothing? This is the eternal price of consciousness. Eternal beginner's mind, forever dying, forever being born, forever discovering you're not who you thought you were." Most people cannot take it. They want to arrive somewhere stable, to finally get it, to be done. Jung wrote about a patient who had been in analysis for 7 years, made incredible progress, integrated massive shadows, developed real consciousness. Then one day she said, "When does it end? When am I healed?" Jung's response both destroyed and liberated her. Never. The unconscious is infinite. You are exploring infinity. How do you complete infinity? Consciousness is not a destination. It is an infinite spiral. The ones who survive spiritual awakening, they fall in love with dying. Not morbidly, but consciously. They realize every death is a birth, every ending a beginning, every loss a revelation. Jung discovered this process produces a specific psychological state, what he called the union of opposites, not choosing light over dark, but containing both. Not picking consciousness over unconsciousness, but powerfully bridging them. Not selecting spirit over matter, but consciously marrying them. This isn't a concept. It is a lived experience that fundamentally restructures your entire psyche. The you that started the journey. That person does not survive, cannot survive, was never meant to survive. What emerges is something else. Not better, not higher, not more spiritual, but more real, more whole, more consciously human. Jung called it individuation, becoming who you always were before the world told you who to be, not transcending your humanity, but finally fully, consciously inhabiting it. This is not the awakening sold in spiritual marketplaces. It is not bliss. It is conscious suffering. It is not peace. It is conscious tension. It is not arrival. It is conscious journey. Jung's personal formula, discovered through his own descent. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But he added something most people miss. And that true self includes everything you are not. The murderer and the saint, the genius and the fool, the god and the animal, all of it consciously integrated into one impossible, paradoxical, authentic self. And that is why most people never survive it. They are trying to survive as who they were while becoming who they are. Impossible. They want the treasure without the descent, the wisdom without the wound, the resurrection without the crucifixion. So here's what Jung would tell you if he were alive today. Stop trying to survive your spiritual awakening. Let it destroy you completely, consciously, with full participation in your own demise. Let the shadow erupt, then integrate it. Let the ego panic, then relativize it. Let the return break you, then rebuild differently. Let the deaths come, then be reborn. Not once, but daily, forever. The spiritual awakening that's happening to you right now, it's not trying to improve you. It's trying to reveal you. The real you. The one hiding beneath every mask, every persona, every spiritual identity you're still desperately clinging to. Most people never survive their spiritual awakening because they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. They want transformation without death. They want awakening without destruction. They want consciousness without losing unconsciousness's comfort. Impossible. Jung survived because he understood. You don't survive spiritual awakening. You die into it so completely that what emerges no longer needs survival. It needs expression. Your symptoms aren't the problem. They're the cure. Your breakdown isn't failure. It's breakthrough in disguise. Your dissolution isn't ending. It's beginning. But only if you stop trying to survive and start trying to transform. Only if you stop seeking comfort and start seeking truth. Only if you stop wanting to be special and start willing to be real. If this helped you understand what's truly happening in your awakening, subscribe. Remember, you're not going crazy, you're going sane. The world just calls sanity crazy because it's so accustomed to sleep. The question isn't, will you survive your spiritual awakening? The question is, will you let it complete its process?